Hello everyone and welcome, thank you for joining, where in this video we're testing the new seasonal mod Particle Deconstruction with fusion rifles. Now this video does only have ordinary fusion rifles, so no linears, which will be getting their own video next week. I've actually already started work on that before this video was published. And I'd also like to quickly apologise for the delay. It took me the best part of a week to actually unlock the final column on the seasonal artifact. Anyway, the weapons tested are coming onto screen now. The perks and the legendaries will be revealed once covering them individually. They also had a major spec mod for testing as everything was against Carl, and with the timings a single loader mod was used and nothing to boost reserves. You'll also find that, and this is something I'm going to do for all testing in future, if in the final magazine of a weapon there's only a single round or two, for example, then I won't be including them. And that's because including a final magazine that's very small can skew the average DPS number by dragging it down. If you want to know more about why that is, including anything else regarding DPS and the principles behind the numbers, I've linked a video in the description where that kind of thing is covered in detail. I'm also not including Anarchy or Wither Horde as I want to get some consistent boss damage numbers for those before they're included in any testing again. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Widower for helping me test 1k voices and plug 1. So firstly, I'm going to quickly explain what the Particle Deconstruction mod does. When equipped and a combatant is damaged by a fusion or linear fusion rifle, a debuff is applied. That debuff stacks up to a maximum of 5, which equates to 40% increase in damage, but only from fusion and linear fusion rifles, so this mod does nothing for anything else, just those two weapon types. There's a table on screen now demonstrating the stacking effect with the percentage increase, and what's really good about it is the debuff can be applied by anyone. So a teammate could proc it, and then you or anyone else could be inflicting more damage without having to proc it for yourself, if that makes sense. Now, with most normal fusion rifles that fire multiple projectiles per burst, this results in the mod reaching its full ×5 stack after just one round or burst. With linear fusion rifles, however, it takes 5 individual rounds. While I'll cover this in more detail in the linear fusion rifle video, it's not a bad idea to prime a target with something like Null Composure, get that full 40% debuff after one burst, and then switch to a linear, such as Threaded Needle or Sleeper Simulant, for example. So, onto the weapons and testing, starting with Merciless. This is an exotic fusion rifle in the energy slot that, after each non-lethal burst against a target, reduces the charge time for the next burst. Now, I'm going to spend a little time talking about damage and charge time here, as Merciless has some funky numbers, the kind of thing we've seen before with high impact reserves on these type of weapons. Coming onto screen now is a table showing base damage for this weapon, so no seasonal mod. It demonstrates the damage per projectile, of which there are 5 per burst, the total damage for each round, and the charge time for that round. What you might notice is that as the charge time reduces, so does the damage, until the 4th burst where charge time settles, and therefore so does the damage. Here's a basic graph to visualise that. Damage is the blue line, orange is the charge time, the primary y-axis is damage, which is on the left, the secondary y-axis is the time in seconds, which is on the right, the x-axis is the round or burst, so 1 to 8. While they're not parallel to begin with, there is a trend, and then once we hit that 4th round where charge time no longer reduces, they both level out and are parallel. The table showing the damage breakdown is now being replaced by one that shows the exact same thing but with Particle Deconstruction, and it's the same outcome, except for each burst is now doing more damage. The opening rounds are exactly the same, as this includes the proccing of the seasonal mod, which, although is fully stacked by the first burst, didn't make a difference for me until the second burst, which is when the full 40% debuff is active. And if we bring the damage onto the graph for the Particle Deconstruction, that visualises exactly what the table is conveying. You can see both start at the same point, as the first burst is the same for both, but for the second burst there's a huge jump in damage due to the seasonal mod. However, because it's already fully procced and doing all it can, the only way for the damage is to go down, which is due to the reduced charge time. And once again, by the 4th round, damage levels off due to that now consistent charge time. If the Particle Deconstruction line wasn't on the opening mag, or the debuff was already fully procced, then it would actually start at around 50,000. Now, some of you may be wondering, why does damage reduce as the charge time does? Well, let me bring this to your attention. It's taken from Bungie's final twab before Season of the Lost began, which is on the 19th of August, and the interesting part reads, a fusion rifle's damage is determined by its charge time stat, similar to how most other weapons' damage is determined by the rate of fire. Masterworks can only increase weapon stats for performance reasons, so, and this is the interesting part, it's not possible to change how charge time maps onto damage without big changes to how the charge time stat works. I may be reading this wrong, but to me, sounds like Merciless damage drops off due to high level coding within the game engine regarding fusion rifle damage and charge time. and changing that would be a lot of work and would come with great risk. So onto the more traditional number stuff. If you stuck around through all of that, then thank you. I was able to hold 17 rounds in reserves with nothing to boost that, but Merciless has 8 in the magazine, so that final and only burst in the third mag has been omitted from the test. This means that for 2 full mags, with the opening burst and the first mag proccing Particle Deconstruction, total damage came to 718,146, with a table on screen breaking that down. For the timings, it was as simple as firing 2 lots of 8, and without the seasonal mod, it was possible to fire all 8 from a single mag against Carl before he died. Total time for this was 15.4 seconds, therefore DPS came in at 46,633, which is very good and extremely good for just a single energy weapon. Moving on now and taking a look at Telesto, another exotic that sits in the energy slot. When fired, there are 7 projectiles that initially stick to a target, causing a very small amount of what I assume is impact damage, and then shortly afterwards they detonate, which does the main bulk of damage from this weapon. I could hold 4 in each magazine and a total of 17 in reserves, meaning 4 full mags, and that final round has been omitted from testing. This also fully procs Particle Deconstruction on the first round in the first mag, with everything after that being with the full 40% debuff. Table on screen now breaking that down as it's too much to say, but total damage was 844,096. For the timings, from the moment the final projectile is fired to the final burst, I've added half a second, as that's about how long it takes to detonate. Other than that, it's just 4 magazines fired at a wall. Total time was 24.28 seconds, meaning DPS came in at 34,765. Next up is Jotunn, or Jotunn. While this only fires a single projectile per round, it inflicts burn damage, and that burn damage appears to proc Particle Deconstruction and stack it up to ×5. So, as with everything else so far, it's only 1 round to get the full 40% debuff. Now, the burn damage was a little inconsistent at times based on how much Carl moved and worked, so I'm sticking to the same numbers for every round, of which all those damage numbers are coming onto screen now in a table. I could hold 5 in each magazine and a total of 17 in reserves, but those final 2 have also been omitted as they'll skew the average DPS value. This meant total damage was 730,412. For the timings, it's just a simple 5 rounds in 3 mags fired at a wall in my case. I haven't added any time for burn damage as it's a very small amount and wasn't really worth the effort. Total time for those 15 rounds was 22.07 seconds, meaning DPS came in at 33,095. And now it's 1,000 voices. In the past, this weapon has never done too well, but now, in my testing at least, that's about to change. This behaves exactly the same as all the other fusion rifles so far, in that the Particle Deconstruction mod is fully stacked by the first round alone. When this weapon is fired, it inflicts 10 lots of initial damage that are actually very small, and then 9 lots of explosive damage that's massive. Fortunately, those small amounts of damage are enough to proc the full 40% debuff, so by the time the detonation happens, and this is for the opening round, they're doing maximum damage. Again, all damage numbers are coming onto screen in a table as it's just too much to talk about. I could hold 4 in a mag and 7 in total in reserves, meaning the second and final mag only had 3. I am going to include those though, as it's still 75% of a full mag, and not including a single reload would skew the average DPS figure, but in the opposite direction to previous weapons so far, i.e. unnaturally increase it. Total damage for all 7 rounds was 862,519. For the timings, it's straightforward, just fire all bursts with 1 reload. I have taken into consideration the time it takes for the quote beam of death to impact and then detonate, as you'll see on the graph. Time for this taken me 15.85 seconds, therefore DPS came in at 54,418. This is competing with the Laments, which is hugely impressive considering you can do it without being on top of the target. Moving on now to the legendaries, and starting with Iota Draconis. This is a fusion rifle introduced during the Season of the Lost, can be acquired by focusing Umbral engrams, sits in the energy slot, and is a high impact frame. It was tested with the perks Liquid Coils and High Impact Reserves. Once again, the opening round fully proc Particle Deconstruction, and the damage breakdown is coming onto screen in a table. I could hold 15 rounds and each magazine could hold 5, so 3 full mags. This meant total damage was 875,303. For the timings, there isn't much to say either, just 3 full mags of 5, and while this did good damage per burst, the slow charge time really hit it hard. Time to fire those 15 was 26.83 seconds, meaning DPS came in at just 32,624. Next up is Null Composure. This is a rapid fire frame, and the perk selected in the final column was of course high impact reserves. Rapid fire frames now have 9 projectiles per burst, up from 7, which made life very hard when trying to determine numbers, as they often just sat on top of each other. As expected, the opening round fully stacked Particle Deconstruction. Those damage numbers are coming onto screen now. I could hold 17 rounds in total and 6 in each magazine, meaning the final mag had 5, therefore I am including this. Total damage came in at 839,741. For the timings, well, yeah, not much to talk about here either, just those 17 rounds. The time it taken me was 19.18 seconds, which brought DPS to 43,782, which is actually really good. And now, a popular request after my last fusion rifle video, it's Cartesian Coordinate. I hope I pronounced that right. This is another rapid fire frame tested with the perks Liquid Coils and High Impact Reserves. The first mag in the opening round also fully procs Particle Deconstruction, with those numbers broken down and coming onto screen now. I could hold a total of 19 in reserves, and each magazine could hold 7. This means 2 full mags and a final one of 5, which I have included. This brought total damage to 957,321. Timings were also very straightforward, with it taking me 21.9 seconds to do that damage, bringing DPS to 43,713. Almost identical DPS to Null Composure, however, longer time firing but more total damage, which is presumably the result of Liquid Coils, increasing damage at the cost of charge time. And finally, it's Plug 1. This is a precision frame, which means 7 projectiles per burst, also in the energy slot, and was tested with the perks Liquid Coils and Reservoir Burst. As with everything else, the opening round fully procced Particle Deconstruction. I could hold 14 rounds in total and 7 in each mag, meaning 2 full magazines is all that was tested, with the damage breakdown on screen now and total damage coming in at 704,116. Now, this didn't do too well, with a time tested of 19.55 seconds. DPS was just 36,016. With Reservoir Burst, this really didn't have the damage capacity to match some of the others, which had high impact reserves. So with all the weapons tested, a table is coming onto screen now, ranking them of order of average DPS from best to worst. Pause the video now if you want more time to look at this, as we're moving on to the graph. Started in the order tested, first up it's Merciless. This weapon really benefits from the large magazine only having to reload once to fire 16, and the reduced charge time as you get through that magazine. Remember, there would normally be a final round in the final mag, but it's been omitted from testing as it was skewed a DPS number, so total damage can go a little higher still, but not by much. Telesto now, and since this can have rather good ad clearing abilities, I don't think it should be particularly special for DPS, and it's not. While it's still a reasonable choice with Particle Deconstruction, there are better. It does have good total damage though, and that's even without the final mag, which only had 1 round in and therefore wasn't tested. If using this, you'll only see a benefit over something like Merciless after around 21 seconds. Next up is Jotunn, and while there are brief moments where it passes Telesto, generally it's doing less damage at any given point. Total damage also isn't really that great, and once the rest of the fusion rifles are on the graph, you'll see there aren't really any situations where this might be the best choice. Burst DPS isn't great, sustained DPS isn't great, and total damage isn't either. But if you like using it and you're having fun, then keep doing so. Now it's 1000 voices, and as you might have expected, it's a clear winner for sustained DPS. However, for burst DPS, and I'm talking around the first 4 to 6 seconds or 2 to 3 bursts, it's only just a little better than Merciless, barely. And as you'll see when Null Composure and Cartesian Coordinate come onto the graph, they do a good job of clinging on to 1k as well. I'll talk a little more about this at the end. Iota Draconis now, and not a great deal to say. Both burst and sustained DPS is relatively poor, and while total damage is actually very good, it takes almost 27 seconds to do that. In some situations, it'll be possible to empty 16 rounds from Merciless, run around and find some special ammo, and then start shooting again before Iota has emptied its first lot in reserves. Good damage, but hit hard by that long charge time. Null Composure next, which was a strong performer. As I briefly mentioned, it can almost match 1k in the opening 5 seconds or so, and while the first reload causes it to fall behind Merciless, it then catches up and passes, doing slightly more damage for a long period of time in the mid-range. The second reload causes it to drop back again, but by 15 to 17 seconds, Merciless has stopped firing and Null Composure is able to then do more damage. I personally prefer this to Merciless as it frees up my heavy slot for an exotic. Now for Cartesian Coordinate, and out of all the energy fusion rifles, this is arguably one of the best options. Burst and sustained DPS is capable of matching Merciless and Null Composure, not too far off 1000 voices at the start, although nothing can match the heavy exotic by around 6 seconds. But it does have the highest total damage in the test, and all that from a legendary fusion rifle, and not even a ritual one. And finally it's Plug 1, and there's little to talk about here. Poor burst DPS, average sustained DPS, and the lowest damage in the test. With Null Composure and Cartesian Coordinate rocking high impact reserves, Reservoir Burst on this just doesn't do enough to allow Plug 1 to match them. The exception to that being Iota Draconis, which despite high impact reserves, has just done bad. Plug 1 is on par with Telesto DPS, but Telesto has better ad clearing and control abilities. So with everything on the graph, what are my thoughts? Well, 1000 voices is something I wanted to talk a little more about since it's a clear winner for sustained DPS, and while burst DPS is still better than everything else in the test, it's actually really close. The only reason it's not ahead from the start is the delay from pushing the fire button to the moment the main bulk of damage occurs, which can be observed at the start of the graph. Everything else has started to do damage, whereas 1000 voices is slightly behind. But let's not forget this is probably the best ad clearing weapon here, something I haven't mentioned. So for situations where burst DPS is a priority, so against mages and champions in difficult content, 1k would still be my choice, and if not, Merciless, Null Composure or Cartesian Coordinate. Not forgetting that those final 3 free up the heavy slot for a completely different heavy hitting weapon type if desired. For boss damage phases with short windows of opportunity, say around 10 to 15 seconds, any of the same 4 would be my recommendation, with 1000 voices still the better choice. For periods where you can be firing for longer than 15 to 20 seconds, Templar being an example, although admittedly in stages, you need to start considering ammo economy. Merciless will be out of ammo, and while there may be some dotted around on the floor from ad kills, it could take a little time to run around and pick up, and you'll need to do that at least every 15 seconds, time that could be used to continue doing DPS from something else. Even 1000 voices runs out of ammo by around 16 seconds, admittedly with base reserves. Cartesian Coordinate has good DPS, but the total damage makes it a great choice for situations where you have plenty of time, and with it only using special ammo, when it does eventually run out, it shouldn't take too much time to find some green bricks on the floor and start using it again. Despite all that, if everyone in a fire team is using something like 1000 voices, a boss might not even survive past 15 seconds. As for the other fusion rifles that I haven't spoken much about, so the bottom 4, personally I don't think there's any reason to use them over one of the top 4 unless A, you don't have any of the top 4 or don't have a Cartesian with good perks, or B, you just have more fun playing with something like Jotunn for example, so you'd rather use that. Both perfectly sound reasons. It's really hard to make recommendations that aren't generic, as there are so many factors that influence what would be the best choice for damage DPS, and while I want to start spending a little time in each video giving my opinion, ultimately it's down to you, the viewer, to look at the numbers and data and make your own decision, based on the specific activity you're doing and the fire team members you're with, if any, amongst a lot of other things that I'm not going to list here though. And on that note, it is all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video and found it helpful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're not already, and give me any feedback in the comments down below. Linear fusion rifles will be covered next in part 2, but until then, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.